Welcome everybody back here on Segal Talks at the Martin E. Segal Theater Center, the Graduate Center, CUNY in Midtown Manhattan, not too far away from the New York Public Library in Bryant Park and the Empire State Building. It's a sunny day today, quite beautiful actually for a day on planet Earth. It doesn't get any better than this, and still, the outlook on the streets is, as we said in the last days, is optimistic. And I think the country feels it's opening up. California officially gave the date for opening. New York State. So we have been following almost every day in the week since last March. These are the most optimistic days. Still, we hear catastrophic news still from India, and the London shutdown again for 4 weeks prolonged because of the variation of the virus, that it can be traced back largely to India, is of real concern to us. Theater also will open and should reopen, but the questions remain: what is necessary? What is urgent? What do we really need to see? What is just, an entertainment? And what is it we should occupy our minds with on that short time we are alive on this planet Earth? And if anything, this Corona time has provoked in ours is, what is important, what is not, what is worth living for, what's missing, what is right, and what is wrong, and also what shall we do with the time. And we, of course, think art is of significance, theater and performance is of real significance, experience the moment, and we are on the research here to do what to do. As Brecht said, new times need new forms of theater, and there have been many who created such new forms, people who were with us, Schachner and Eugenio Barba, Robert Wilson, Meredith Monk, and so many who were with us in these year. And also today we have a great practitioner of theater with us who will help us to understand better the time where we live in, and what role art has played in his life, and what he has been up to in the time of Corona here. And we have with us Gerald Thomas. Gerald, welcome.
Hello.
Gerald, where are you?
In New York City, Manhattan, 23rd Street, NFDR, inside the East River. Quite frankly, we're a bubble. Let's face it, we are a bubble.
So you can see the river when you look outside your window. And
I can show our audience. I can do better than that. I can show.
Oh my God! Look at that. Yeah.
Literally inside the water.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know, and I have to admit, to my shame, I also was not fully aware of our great friend of the Segal Center, Raphael Viena, said you have to talk to Gerald Thomas. He's a great artist who is a global artist with roots in the US, actually, but also Brazil and Germany, in the UK. And so Gerald is a theater and opera director and a playwright who spent actually most of his time in the United States and here in New York, as well as in England, Brazil, and also Germany. And he has worked in major stages in all these countries. He began his life in the theater at Ellen Stewart's Great La Mama, and he said everything he owes to her. He owes his life to her, and we will come back to that. But here in La Mama, he began working with Samuel Beckett, who he knew personally, and he staged a lot of his work, important one. We will come back to that. Also with Julian Bach from the Livings here, George Bateniev, who was in our program, and Freud Neumann. And he knew and worked on plays with Heiner Müller, and has a very serious and I think friendship and relationship with the great Philip Glass, who also talks about him. You can find it on Gerald's website, a longer interview that is a part of a BBC documentary about him. Thomas formed and established his dry opera company in São Paulo, where he has staged a lot of his work, and it has a part of an existence also in London, but also is here in some way exists in New York City. He has done over 65 productions, a lot of operas actually in over 15 countries. And he continues, as it says on his CV, to create work for the stage. Thomas, how do you create work for the stage at the time of Corona? What happened? How did you experience this year?
I don't. I don't. I mean, have, of course, like with everything else, a split opinion about what's happening right now. But it's a funny, it's almost like an in-joke, or so to speak, because I've had an incredibly pleasant experience during coronavirus, because my online production of a play called Earth in Trance was so much, I mean, it was overwhelmingly seen by people, both in July of last year and then again April this year, 2 different filmings. This last production was actually filmed with a film crew and that kind of stuff. And it was just an overwhelming reaction, which rendered me 34 glowing reviews. I mean, you know, I never left my house. I've never left this. This was all done via Zoom, like we are here. And yet I managed to revive a play that was written and staged back in 2006. But and the actress, Fabiana Gugli, was at her house in São Paulo, and it was all done there. The place based on Livestreamed, on the last aria sang by Isolde in Tristan and Isolde by Richard Wagner. And it's exactly about this period. It's about being locked up in a dressing room, not being able to leave because there's another singer taking over her part. But the idea of claustrophobia, the idea of being locked in without being able to move, speaking her mind off to a swan, is what the play was. And I think it struck, this is precisely why I think the audience saw it, because they saw themselves in it. It struck that personal note with people. So rather than go off and stage these, you know, huge things where people are just wondering what is going on, you know, and this metaphorical, metaphysical theater with meta language being the core center of it all. This was a almost realistic production where people could actually really relate to. And
wow, that's impressive.
And it's not very optimistic, but you know, Frank, the thing is, I've always been very critical of what we call theater. On the other hand, I love the idea of the ritual. You know, we meet at a place, we have the camaraderie of the group. The audience has to do the same. They have to leave the house, park the car, meet at a specific place, and enjoy or experience the production together. Together. It's a social event. Here, it's an individual thing, and it's never going to work. First of all, because it's a flat screen, and there aren't many possibilities. Plus, the attention span is not the same. You know that in the theater, you breathe together with the actors. It's like a big lung. It's a heart and a lung beat, you know. And here, you can go off, get a Coca-Cola in the fridge or get an ice cream, come back, and the play's still rolling. So in other words, it's not very different from watching a movie via YouTube or Netflix or something. It's happening regardless of the audience. And I love the interference of the audience when they cough and when they produce noise. In one production at the Cuvillier Theater in Germany, during my production of Sturmspiel, which is the Tempest with Endgame by Beckett, 200 out of 800 people, 200 got up together like it was a rehearsed thing, turned their backs to the audience and marched out of the theater. And it's a Baroque theater with wooden floors, so you could hear the footsteps vibrating in the theater. I think it's a glorious experience, really fantastic.
Yeah, so it provoked something in them. They made a decision to get up. Oh, listen, I have a question. If I understood right, you left school early. You studied yourself in libraries, and to finance your life and your young kid, you drove ambulances. What was going through your mind when you heard the ambulances last year? And I'm sure you heard in your location many of them.
Yeah, I live across from Bellevue and NYU, and they go all the time. I mean, it's like a constant siren. thank God my windows are very thick and block the noise off. But it was pretty horrible. And in the building, I could see it. I live in a huge building, and you could see the elevator always stuck on the floor because a gurney or, you know, some kind of a stretcher would be collecting an old person who would be going out, and then you'd never see them again. So you know exactly what happened. But the ambulance was one of the few things I did a lot of stuff. Like, I guess, a lot of young artists have to do a lot of stuff in order to support themselves. I mean, I wasn't in the professional theater. I started here in New York doing something maybe I shouldn't talk about, but I was a kid for hire, so to speak, you know. And so in London, at the age of 16, I started reading everything possible at the British Museum Library, which is where Marx wrote Das Kapital and so on. But I was a coffee taster by profession, which really is an insanity. An ambulance driver. I was a chef's assistant, of course, or you could say dishwashing liquid assistant, or I was an international telephone operator. You had to stick in those things, you know, depending on the country that the person was asking. So it's, you know, I got married very early. I was married very early, so I had to support this thing called marriage, family.
How did you connect to La Mama and Alan Stewart? How did you get there from driving the ambulances in London?
When I moved back from London to New York, I'm not sure exactly how I got connected to the company called Mabum Mines. Lee Brewer, Ruth Malachek, Philip, and Fred Newman. And so I ended up being part of a production of The Tempest at the Delacorte Theater in 1981, exactly 40 years ago now, with all these people, Raul Julia, you know, playing the role of Prospero. And little by little, I started wanting to do workshops. My relationship with Joe Papp was going very badly because he wanted me to do all these Polish political plays, and that was not what was, you know, I want to do Beckett. I want to do more, you know, metalinguistic theater. And so Ellen picked me up, and Ellen said, well, do a couple of workshops, you know, teach people how to speak with an English accent, this, you know, this kind of stuff. And then one day I said, Ellen, I'm ready with a production if you want me to stage it. And it happened to be Samuel Beckett's world premiere of All Stranger Way, which opened January of 1984. I was 29 years old. And then I got to know Beckett personally. I started working with Beckett in Paris in 1984, 85, 86, and not until he died, because I stopped seeing him for a while. But I got to do all these adaptations of Beckett prose. And then for some kind of it really is a coincidence, because when my intendant, the artistic director of the Bayerische Stadt of the State Theater in Munich, was Günther Belitz. He had hired me. And I said to him, well, why not do Waiting for Godot? You know, this was when Beckett was still alive. You being German, you know that things begin 2 years in advance, you know, with the sets and all that. So it was also almost an unfortunate thing that Beckett died, and a month later we were opening Godot at the Cuvelier Theater again. So it seemed like, you know, I was an opportunist who seized the opportunity to do something because Beckett was dead. It wasn't, it was planned in advance. But so I've also done Endgame, the traditional so-called plays. They're not very interesting for me because I do the prose, I do the internal, you know, dialogue of what Beckett is thinking and putting out. And that's the way he was as a person. He spoke that way. He actually spoke that way. I used to go to Paris to meet him. He spoke that way.
Well, one could argue that that the oeuvre, the work of Beckett is, you know, also concerned is we will all die. We know that. We've been reminded now by something that we all try to ignore, especially America does try to ignore. But what do we do before we die? What is worth doing.
It's a great.
How do you connect that idea of Beckett and Corona time? Did it get a new urgency for you, or was it a confirmation?
Yeah, I mean, I think theater deals with death. This is what we deal with. I mean, go back to Shakespeare, it's all about death, it's all about dying. All the Renaissance writers write about death. And go back to Chaucer, it's all about death. It's all about death with Plato and Sophocles. It's all about death. It's all about our ability to transcend this monster called death, or accept it and just lie there like Finnegan's Wake or Malone Dies or one of those things. So this, I think in a theater, we die every night when the curtain closes. And it's no wonder the stagehands who keep the props, they're called grave diggers for a good reason. We die every time the curtain closes. There's a kind of a, you can only talk about the experience you've just had. You can never really communicate it unless you do a play again the next day, so you're alive again. Here, we just have this idea, and I think, let me just say this. I think the best translator in my time of this thing called death is Thaddeus Cantor. His theater was about the living dead, so to speak, these people circulating almost like sculptures, covered in dust, almost like post 9/11 in a way. And I lived, my relationship with death is ambiguous, because most of my family was exterminated in concentration camps in Germany. And so, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I would hear about Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, the whole lot of concentration camps and who died and how they died. And of course, I used to live in Williamsburg, which is kind of opposite across. I got the clear view. I used to have a clear view of the World Trade Center, and I saw the planes hit the buildings in real time and the collapse in real time. So that was a second idea of, my goodness, it's very close. It's very close. So there's a mechanical thing that takes over. I think you're right. Americans don't want to deal with death, and so it's always a happy ending. It's always a sugary thing, sugar-coated ending. But Europeans, on the other hand, are exactly the opposite. They dwell on death. So all the operas, especially Wagner, it's all about who dies and how they die and how long they take to die on stage, how much they can sing while they're dead already. But this is typical Schopenhauer. It's typical nihilism. It's typical Nietzsche and Wagner. Actually, it's although I think probably Nietzsche is a little bit more optimistic with the eternal return and all that. But the Corona thing. So the second part of the question, how I first of all, I don't really believe we're over it right now. Like you said, the theater might come back, but how is it? And if we take just one example, Broadway, for instance, where the producer needs a packed house, or at least 85% of the audience, paid audience, sitting there. If it's going to be one seat with two intermittent seats empty, meaning a third of the theater, he's not going to make a profit. So he can't pay anybody. So unless the unions come down from the platform and make a deal, say, well, no, we're going to work for nothing, or we no longer work for $75 an hour, we work for 10, and the actors do the same, and it becomes a team effort, which might happen. It might happen. It's like a war situation, a team effort where there are no classes, where everyone feels like they're part of the enterprise. Well, maybe then. Otherwise, the industry as we know it doesn't stand a chance at the moment, because you can't sit, you will never be able to sit next to the other person, within breathing, spitting distance. And that's precisely the fun of the theater, because you're being manipulated from the left and the right and the back. And from the front, you have this magnificent thing, which is unreal, this world opening up to you by actors and directors and musicians. So it's a very unlikely situation. So what we should do, in my opinion, is not read the papers every day and put New York One on and listen to what Cuomo is saying about opening up, what the de Blasio opening up. Yeah, it'll open up. It's opening up gradually. But we shouldn't take it personally. The theater is not going to open up so soon. You know, maybe give it another year. Let these architects and engineers think of a alternative to the distribution of audiences, you know, groups of people, triple vaccinated, quadruple vaccinated. I don't know what it's going to be, but you talked about the Delta variant in the UK. Yeah, there are going to be variants. I mean, there are, you know, with the Yemen, there are countries in the world that don't even have a vaccine. And these people, when they travel, they will bring it. And so there's no question that this is a mutant virus, which we don't seem to accept. It's a mutant. There was a Brazilian variant, there was a South African variant, now Indian variant, and the UK variant to begin with. There's a percentage of us who will be immune due to this acquired the herd immunity, this thing that we collectively acquire. But I think that exposing us, the audience, to a closed-in environment called theater, you know, maybe an open-air amphitheater. Yeah, well, that's like the Delacorte in Central Park, maybe. Maybe that's the alternative. Take all the roofs off the theaters and let it happen, maybe. But you know, that darkness, the black box, and that kind of spectacle to, you know, because the director, as you know, the director wants to be God, wants to control the climate, wants to control the atmosphere, the amount of light that comes in. So it's not like a rock concert, which you can do at midday, you know, with the sun blasting on everyone. It's about the brain of the director. It's about the concept, as we call it. And that is not open to weather. It doesn't rain in the theater unless you make it rain, right? It's not light in the theater unless you turn on the light. So it is it's Genesis happening, the biblical idea of Genesis happening, the Fiat Lux idea of Genesis happening every day in the theater. Well, that will change.
Yeah, and also, you know, so 80 to 85% are tourists or people driving into New York. And at the moment, we have very, very few of them, if any. You worked in so much in Germany, in Brazil, and also UK, and big stages. What do you think about American theater? What's right and what's wrong about it?
I don't divide theater up into nationalities, you know, simply because I'm always surprised by what I see when I least expect it. I can give you an example. I was in Zagreb, Croatia in 1999 as a guest production of Nowhere Man. And I was invited to see a production it was an adaptation of Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. And it was by a production conceived and directed by Branko Brezovic, a local Croatian Serbian director. He utilized on stage one or two actors from all the different parts of former Yugoslavia, from Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Slovenia and all that. So the language wasn't important, but the performance was so magnificent, and it was so much about the fall of the Roman Empire. And it was so much like and I thought, all these fat men had high heels on with little rabbit shoes. And I never expected to see anything like that in Zagreb, but I did. So German theater, American theater, I think what we can say is that Broadway, the musical idea of Broadway, is a fantastic American response to the stagnant German Italian opera, where people, basically fat singers, stand in one position where they can see the conductor and they can project their voices, but they don't move. And if they have to move because this annoying creature called the director, told them to move. They resent it and they don't do it well. That idea of singing for 45 minutes, sometimes an aria can last 45 minutes, even more, is boring, let's face it. Even for the theater goers who are fanatic about opera, if you don't know what's going on, and if you don't read the libretto in the program notes, you don't know what it's about, because nobody understands what the singers are singing in the German opera. In the Italians, because of the amount of consonants, you can understand a little more. But so I think at one point somebody from you know, with a culture, with an education of musical theater said, enough, we'll make it into an adventure. You know, we'll use the opera codes, the codifications of the opera, but we'll make it really exciting. We'll do dance and we'll do this happen. And the set is going to change, which Wagner already did with the Gesamtkunstwerk thing. There's transformation music written for set changes, but it's not usual. It's not usual. So I don't know what American theater is. Is it Tennessee Williams? Is it Bob Wilson doing Heiner Müller? Or is it Trisha? I mean, I don't really understand that kind of stuff, and I don't divide it up into nationalities. What I do, see, I have to tell you a little bit about my personal story, why I ended up in Brazil. It's because it's almost like a prophecy. When I was directing Julian Beck, he was terminally ill. He was about to die.
For the Beckett, for the Beckett work.
The Beckett trilogy, yeah. And so, I mean, we did an incredible run at La Mama, and then we went to Frankfurt, to Theater am Turm in Frankfurt, where, by the way, Richard Schechner saw us. And he said to me, whenever I picked him up at 98th Street and West Bend Avenue to bring him down to the theater, he said, you have to leave New York, Do what
Julian Beck said that.
Julian, yeah. Julian said, leave New York and do exactly what you do here, but do it in Brazil. Do it on a huge scale. They have the money to do it. And they would love this kind of based on absurdist, maybe, you know, theater, where you just put in ideas, and you leave it up to the audience to, you know, think about it later. And he said, well, build a household name for yourself and then come back to New York. And I'm sure that the New York Times will give you a full cover page, front page, exactly like it happened. When I came back with the company, with the Kafka trilogy, the Times cultural section, the Arts and Leisure, you know, stamped us on a huge cover, giving us, and that projected us to the world. You know, next thing was the Vienna Festival, and then from there on, we went. And so I started doing things on a bigger stage in the world as well. Because as you know, La Mama is tiny, you know, basically you can't do anything. The seating is very low. But in New York, what it did in a way, you know, is in New York, when you belong to a bubble group, the so-called experimental theater people, downtown theater, it's downtown and it's poor, and there's a team effort. There's almost like an ideology, and all you want to do is you want to receive an OB given out by the Village Voice. You want to be reviewed and liked by the Voice. You don't care about the mainstream New York Times. You want a picture of yourself in the Soho News or the East Village, whatever it's called. And the world tells you, you know, you can get out of this bubble. And it certainly did for me, because I started winning all these awards I never thought in my life would be possible. Mainstream, Molière prizes, 3 of them, you know, all of a sudden, Molière prize. So I blame people who want to be part of small groups of people and live inside of a bubble that has its own verbology, terminology, and ways of communicating, because it never breaks out and it never wants to really communicate with a larger amount of people. And it's the same thing with Broadway. It's about entertainment. It's not about thinking. Don't even think about it. Every production that deals with the deep ideas of philosophical ideas about life and death will fail. They do. I did. I failed on Broadway because my production was taken to 42nd Street. My Beckett production was taken to 42nd Street. Well, the same critic who had loved it at La Mama, given it a glowing review, gave it a glowing review again. And the last line said, well, unfortunately, I can't recommend it to my Broadway theater goers. Well, that killed it. That was the end of it. So I mean, it makes you wonder why in the West End in London, well, the National Theatre, the Old Vic is they're part of the West End, and the Barbican Centre. They stage daring productions, or they even stage Krapp's Last Tape, or stuff like that. Well, you don't see it ever here. You don't see it. It's a safer way of conducting the industry. It's about safety. It's about money. Really is about money. It's about ending so that you can catch Saudis around the corner to have dinner. It's a coordinated effort. So the bus is waiting for that crowd outside Saudi so they can be bussed back to the hotel. It's a moving mechanism, which you don't have enough. It doesn't exist in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you see as a future of theater? A theater that has some kind of urgency. I think Philip Glass talked about your theater as an adrenaline theater, and you were this ambulance driver. And somehow, when I look at your clips, I saw, you have a feeling there's an urgency, signaling through the flames. What do you think is a theater that would be meaningful, that makes a contribution right now? What do we need?
When you live inside of a theater called life, you don't need theater, because what is happening politically after Donald Trump, we started living this farce of a life where the protagonist was an orange man with orange hair, speaking the dumbest possible things, being a thief, basically being the CEO liar of the country, or the liar in chief. Well, but he is always interesting to watch. I mean, it's amazing to watch bits and pieces of his rallies, because he commands the audience better than any actor I have known, even John Gielgud. So this lying, horrible conspiracy theorist, he's not even a Republican at heart. He was a Democrat 20 years ago. He paid for Bill Clinton's campaign. So, he doesn't stand it. He's an opportunist, but we live in a post-Trumpian world, which divided, as you know, the country into really half and half. And after the insurrection attempt on January 6th, it really divided up even further. But that is theater as well. That is theater. That is a Shakespearean tragedy in real life. That is a Pirandello play in real life. That's a Calderón de la Barca play in real life. So you have that. When you watch the news on TV, when you read it in the papers, you no longer trust the left, the right, the center, anything. You have to make up your own mind, which is what theater really is about. So we live in a theatrical world. It may not be the theater that you would have chosen, that I would have chosen, but nevertheless, it is a theatrical world. And so we, the theater people, need time to digest this thing, and to regurgitate back something that is an adequate response on equal terms, or even stronger, like a good tennis match. Because we were caught off guard. We were caught off guard by this son of a bitch called Trump. And so, and all this, all these maniacs, these organizations, white supremacists and all that, which have been around for a long time, but this time stronger than ever. So we should use the opportunity of being alone and brooding and thinking about the future and so on, not to come up with theatrical ideas, but come out with, we should concentrate on thinking philosophically what the possibilities could be. And that's not thinking about a play, 2 plays or 3 plays. It's about our existence, or maybe not, but it's certainly, we have to find and re-cement the foundations of our lives. We've been cut from our foundations. The building is wobbly because it no longer has the, you know, the pylons that to hold it up. That has been cut off. And of course, because we are liberals in the theater, to half of America, meaning 150 million people, we are the bad guys right now because we're in the liberal arts. So it's a great opportunity to take us a back seat and think, well, there must be a way out. After the Inquisition, there was a way out. After the McCarthy era, there was a way out. After each repressive era, you know, the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Latin Americans and even Germany after the Third Reich had to come up with an answer about what to do. So maybe Brecht was the answer during and after the Third Reich, but each country found its own solution to that repressiveness. Here, I find it equally the same. It's a repressive force coming from the outside, whether it's in the form of a virus or a virus coupled up with an ideology. It's the same thing. We are forced to take a back seat, and it's affected all of us equally.
Mm-hmm. Did you dream something up?
Did I what?
Did you dream something up? Did you think of something in that year?
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, I'm writing plays, and one of the plays I'm writing is called Traitor, you know, from treason and betrayal, because I feel that we as humans have been betrayed by a force of nature and by ourselves, because, you know, we communicate the virus to other people. We become the enemy. I remember the beginning of the mask wearing thing, the instructions of the CDC, the social distancing, mask wearing, the streets of New York were empty. I used to go out here on 23rd Street. I couldn't see a single soul. And whenever we did see somebody coming our way, we would hide our faces, meaning that person, no matter who he was the enemy. So only a traitor, somebody capable of betraying the system, will come out the winner. So I'm writing I'll show you. These are the books, and I'm writing a sequel to all of them. It gives me time to reposition myself. You know, think about Britain during the Blitzkrieg, during the bombs falling. Everyone had to rethink life, and even in Germany too. I mean, the Germans being Dresden being bombarded, but the inhabitants of Dresden were not responsible for the Third Reich, but they were being bombed. Or Hiroshima, Nagasaki, each of those. That is their life afterwards. Well, I went to Hiroshima in 1999. Back to life. Trees growing, people living, buses going, taxis, you know, restaurants open. You think, wow, you know, in a place where there was this mass destruction, killed almost everyone, burnt everything to the ground. Yeah, it's back. I think we will always come back, Frank. We are undefeatable phoenixes. You know, no matter how the amount of ashes, we make a comeback because it's our nature. And that's why I think the theater is an important thing, because theater reflects the nature that we are. Our weaknesses and our strengths at the same time. That's the wonderful contradiction about theater. We can place both on stage, but not always within one generation or 25, not even two. It takes time, which is something we are not used to because the internet gives us quick answers to everything. Google this and it's on your screen and you forget it within minutes. But if we only think, well, all right, so this time it's different. And it is different because it's the first pandemic in 100 years. So we, we don't know anybody who lived through the last pandemic and told us the story. But maybe it was the same after 1918. After 1919 or 18 came the 1929 crash, and then the uprising of the Third Reich, and then the war. Think about all that and how much of art was important to huge amounts of civilizations being destroyed. Well, my father tells me there was no need for art, and that was in the middle of Germany. My mother tells me there was no need for art. We looked at Rembrandt, on the wall. There was no need to be reminded of Goya's Black Period, eating a child. There was no need for any kind of a grotesque approach, which is what we do. We are grotesque people. We reveal the grotesqueness in the human race. Well, when they are living that on a daily basis, they don't need to be reminded of it because their skin tells the full story. I'm sorry to be so grim.
No, that's very important. So in a way, you might say we are still in a time where we do not need art, but we have to think, we have to prepare.
How much of us, and I include myself, how much of us really take our ego and our creative ability to the seat called existential questions, or maybe Sigmund Freud or Jung or you name it, Lacan. How much of us really question everything we do in a very serious manner? There was no time because tomorrow morning the agent will be calling, is it ready? We need to rehearse in 3 weeks and it has to be ready in 6 weeks and has to be on a stage in Hamburg at the Thalia Theater or at Kampnagel in a matter of 2 months. There was never time to do anything. We were always tied up with money, production costs, cut it by 2 days, travel costs. I remember when a set of mine came from New York and it got lost in Hamburg. It went to Johannesburg and said, oh, what do you do without a set? Well, you have to do it. It'll take time to come from Johannesburg to Hamburg. So the improvisational aspect is questionable, but it is also an existential act, which we need to exercise. I think for a long time, we've been automats, we've been robots geared by a mechanical need to produce. Now, there is no such thing. So sit on your fucking ass and think about a proper, strong response to the human questions which arise from a pandemic. There's no need for an answer tomorrow or by September or by November. We shouldn't put a date on these things. How can you put a date on anything? It doesn't have, the only things that should have a date are vaccines. I need it ready by then. So work your asses off. So science maybe has a date, but this is a very intricate mechanism which does not always respond to pressure.
Yeah. I think after 9/11, you asked Ellen Stewart in that interview you did with her, is the world better now or is it worse? What do you think about now? Is the world better or is it worse?
It's more adult. America never had a war at home except for Pearl Harbor, which is Hawaii. It's all the way, it's not really, it's an island. We never had the war here at home. We always sent people to Normandy. We sent people to Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, all the wars, and they all came back in body bags. But we don't know what it's like to be hit in the middle of a city like with those two planes. And that, as traumatic as it is, and you can hear it on my voice, this is asbestos. My voice was never like this, because I worked at Ground Zero as a volunteer for 3 weeks, 3 months, I'm sorry. The impact of that, you can certainly camouflage it with George Bush's "we'll be back, dead or alive," catch us on. But I think most of the people in New York or in America understand that life hangs by a very thin thread, and that things can happen that nobody ever expected could be possible. So I think we grew up. A war, if it does anything to you, it makes you grow up very quickly. This is you don't need to read Clausewitz to understand that the syndrome of war, post-war, is something that is imprinted in you, like Kafka's nightmares, or the idea of becoming a bug in Metamorphosis, or the trial, being imprisoned without any reason whatsoever, with no guilt, apparent guilt. Those are traumas that Kafka acquired as a child, speaking German in Prague, in the Czech Republic. The German Jewish community spoke German in a country that wasn't a German-speaking country, a Slavic country. So that was an imprinted trauma. And I like to explain to people, you're German and you know it, but I like to explain to people that Traum is dream and Trauma is a deep wound, only aided by one letter, the letter A at the end. Except for the spelling of Albtraum, the nightmare, or the dream of the Alps, differently spelled. But you can, I'm living an Albtrauming. I'm in the Alps. I used to live in Wengen, so in the Alps. It is a dream, but how much is the contradiction included in the word? Meaning it can easily turn into a nightmare, and a Traum can easily turn into trauma, depending on the circumstances. And those circumstances, which we highly regard in the theater, because it's that moment where it flops, the plot flops to a different thing, is caught in real life by tragedy when you least expect it. That's when you think, the hand of God, Deus ex machina, the hand of God has given you a slap in the face, deal with it, grow up, deal with it. Well, I mean, don't we all dream of, I do, I am, still a hippie, I believe. I'm a guy from the countercultural movements of the 1960s, a beatnik, directed Julian Beck, very closely connected to the ideals. I was in Woodstock, very closely connected with that kind of a lifestyle and ideals. But I think of myself, I'd love to have a house in Florida, in Miami or nearby, a huge pool. I'd like to go swimming. I'd like to have a boat and do some fishing. It's the bourgeois in me, and the bourgeois in everyone comes alive in times of these, where you're restrained to basically the minimum. And you should question that. Who are you really? Are you the bourgeois inside of you? Are you repressing that bourgeois? Or do you stick by the principles that you are committed to and that you announced to the world that you were? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Sometimes all I want is money and to live in Montana or Nebraska in the middle of nothing with a huge farm and 25 goats, and 10 horses and 10 dogs. Well, but what else? What was the point, right? I mean, after maybe a year, you would go crazy, long to come back to a city and deal with people and get, nervous about this, that, and the other, and politics and all this shit happening in the world. But we don't need it in reality. Do we need, I'm asking you, do we need to know what Biden is telling Putin right now in Geneva? Is that necessary? Is it going to change anything? It's all lies anyway. You know, it's all the departments of the press department and the Department of Communications that put together a press release and announce it back to them. We'll never know what they really talk about. We'll never know. We still don't know who killed John Kennedy. We still don't know anything. It's still a conspiracy. People think that Elvis Presley is alive and living, vegetating in Memphis, Tennessee. Isn't it fascinating that you cannot really convince anybody of anything? We people in the theater want to convince people of something. All we do is we put a temporary halt on that kind of a definitive answer. And we give them a little room to, oh, that was too good. I cried. I don't know why I cried. It was wonderful. I laughed. I don't know why I laughed. So we give them that suspension of disbelief, basically what it is. But they'll go back to the cynicism imprinted upon them by politics and daily life and history. It's always a pact between a few people, and we are caught in the middle. It's always a pact. You know, no matter if it's a politician you like or you don't like, it's your party, it's the opposite party, it doesn't matter. It's always a pact behind closed doors or the situation room, and it's hard to believe that it's true.
Mm. Well, it was kind of a pessimistic view on history, which you also in a way share with Heiner Müller. You spoke about the machine, the idea of the machine, the importance of history, and that it is important to know about history because you don't learn from history. We know we don't learn from it, and it's important to know. And but also Müller's sense of history of politics and real politics, and also the classics. You worked with Beckett. You also worked with Heiner Müller. He came to your openings. What was your relationship to him, and what would he think now?
You mean Heiner?
Yeah.
I think he was actually a very funny guy. I mean, he was, when he lowered his head with his half a little bit left of a cigar in his fingers through those thick glasses, there was always a funny commentary to be made. And I remember he took me to see, there was a conference in New York. He stayed at my place in Brooklyn at the time. And we went together to a Penn conference of writers. And Norman Mailer was the leader, the chief, the boss at the moment. And Norman Mailer had written a play about Marilyn Monroe and staged it. And we all needed to stay there and watch it. It was dreadful. It was absolutely awful. The acting was really bad. The lines were terrible. And Heiner, and I said, listen, let's just leave. And Heiner said, no, we need to be exposed to the grotesque so we can answer it. And at the end, I said, Heiner, are we going to speak to Mailer? Are we going to say congratulations? Or are we going to be truthful and say this is horrendous? We didn't need to, because there was a critic, a former critic from New York called John Simon, I think originally from Yugoslavia, who said, my goodness, you guys must have hated it, right? And we said, yeah. Oh, good. I didn't, but I'll tell Norman. So I said, Heiner, let's go. And he loved being a kid. Heiner Müller loved being a child, running from a restaurant without paying. You'd never think that, but in New York he did. In Brazil he did too. In Rio and São Paulo, he loved the attention that he didn't get in Germany because the Stasi scandal was. Is he an agent? Was he an agent? Is there an ambulance passing by?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So he was, he loved the fact he couldn't believe, because he couldn't believe the fact that he was known in Brazil. He was recognized and known in Brazil, and I'm responsible for that because I opened Quartet in Brazil as well with two of the most famous, the grand dame of the Brazilian theater and, the actor. So he came to the opening and he couldn't believe that it was done on such a scale and that he would be giving so many interviews without the fury and the rancor of the German journalists who didn't like him, like Benjamin Hendricks in Die Zeit, or Peter Eden
Peter Eden hated him.
Yeah, Peter Eden in Frankfurter Rundschau. Precisely that production, the Beckett trilogy, brought over by Peter Eden, is what made Heiner Müller contact me, because his agent at the Verlag
der Autoren,
yeah, of Walter something, said, Heiner, you must come to Frankfurt and watch this, and that's where he came. So in a way, it was Peter Eden who was responsible for my connection with Heiner Müller.
In a way, one could say both Beckett and Heiner Müller marked some kind of an end of a writing for the theater, or a turning point. Heiner Müller, perhaps in a more dramaturgical idea, this brilliant Hamlet machine he did. Beckett, who perhaps brought the form to an end where perhaps not so much more formal innovation was even thinkable, except perhaps the lights and lines and movement. Do you think that after them, you knew both of them? You know, first of all, what are their connections? Where were they different, and where is playwriting going after them?
That's a wonderful question. I wish I had the answer. I think Beckett wrote from the heart and the mind, but there was a huge connection between this and here, and what he saw, he wrote. And of course, there was a wordplay, and he fooled everybody by saying that he wrote in French, and then it's bullshit. The name Lucky does not exist in French. Godot would be Dieu. It's God. You know, the words like that. Ham is a ham actor, and ham Schinken, meaning those words don't exist in French. And Heiner Müller was a structural investigator. Almost like the architect, but also the structural engineer, who needed to see the inner workings of a play, who dissected the inner workings of a play, revealed them to us. I don't know if Heiner Müller is for a wide audience, or maybe just for an audience of theater people, because what he does with Hamlet, what he does with Medea Material, what he does with the Landrocker, or all of the plays, that is to reveal the trick within dramaturgy. And so I don't know that the audience wants to know that in the same way that an audience, somebody who wants to buy an automobile, does not want to go to a garage and see it all stripped and the carcass of, the skeleton and being put, he wants the ready-made car ready to drive. So that machine was taken apart by Heiner Müller. The autopsy of drama was made by Heiner Müller, while Beckett was still doing drama. So I think Heiner Müller was a little bit more advanced in front of, because he was already critical of Beckett. He didn't really want to know much about my relationship with Beckett. He never really asked much. And he always laughed at my knowledge of historic facts in the theater. He said, well, überhaupt nicht wichtig. It's not necessary. It's not important. It's important to be read the first 20 pages of something, and the last 20, leave the middle. The middle is the ego of the author. Yeah, but Hamlet Machine and Medea Material are still incredibly strong, impactful statements, but I would put them on a podium as a lecturer, not necessarily as a director on a stage. Now, after having done so much Heiner Müller, of course, I can say that. But of course, the experience of working with Heiner Müller, him being there, his opinions on Carmen Confiltro, my production, that he was vital to, because he really wrote half of it. There's no price to that. And there's no price when you've been through Heiner Müller, you're not the same ever again. It's the same with Beckett. You're just not the same. You've grown.
Yeah. In a way, what you said about the time we live in, and so something something has happened. But what do you think? I mean, you talked about your dry opera company. Say, ask me in 20 years if it's still standing, lying, if it's dead. You know, it's almost 20 years later. So where are we? And what are you dreaming on? Is utopia? You talked also about utopia, especially also when you talked about the great Julian Bach, who actually, if I'm right, died on the tour performing your work, performing your work. So what is happening? Is that dead? Is it dead? Should people dream on? What do you say to young? If you would be, talk to the young kid, that came to Alan Stewart, that's your other. What do you say now? What do you say?
Dream. Keep on dreaming. You cannot kill a dream. Never kill a dream, because that in the dream may be the answer to future questions. Don't ever kill utopia. Don't ever kill the hope. It's almost like a phony thing to say. It's almost tacky, but hope is the most important thing, especially after having lived through a heavy period. This is a heavy period. If you don't have that, if you cannot dream, if you cannot take the time to pay attention to your dreams, if you don't have the time to relish your hope and make it into something concrete, then there is no point. But if you do, you'll gain a lot from it. So that's when I do a workshop. That's always, no matter how pessimistic I may be personally, the message is always a hopeful one, because the youth is the future, and there is no denying that. So I may recognize that my time is over soon, will be over soon. I'm 60, I'll be 67. So I mean, like Peter Brook's heydays with Mahabharata or the Conference of the Birds, all that stuff was, until he reached 55 and stuff. After that, it just became, another Cherry Orchard and a Beckett piece and this and the other. You lose that adventure, the impetus of being an adventurer. If you lose that, forget it. You have to keep renewing the pact, almost like Faust and Mephistopheles. You have to renew the Goethean pact with the devil every day. And of course, making a pact with the devil is not exactly a pleasant thing. You may be very atrocious. You may be doing atrocious things to yourself and other people. But if it sparks, there is a flame. If it doesn't spark, there is no fire. So it needs, friction is necessary. This is what people don't remember. They want everything to be smooth. Things are not. Even birth, the amount of blood the woman loses and what comes out of that, it's just, think about the pain of all that. It's so painful to be born. It's so painful for that little baby to be, hung upside down and being slapped, and that not being able to express and understanding and growing is painful. The bones hurt within the body. Everything hurts.
Yeah. And still we celebrate it, right?
We celebrate
the birthday.
Yes, we celebrate it. Well, we celebrate it because we don't remember that day. We remember the cake, where we don't remember that day. And then there is a period, which I call a plateau, like maybe between 30 and 50, where everything is wonderful and stuff. And then it's the way down again, So what is the point when you're at your wisest and you know everything and you have the answer? You no longer have the physical ability to perform that. It's ironic, isn't it? It's the least you could say about it. It's ironic.
Yeah.
But it's the truth. People are living longer and longer, but are they able to give back to society what they did 50 years ago? Maybe, I don't think so. I want to see genius again, Frank, I want to see a Mozart, a real Mozart, I'll say, a real Wagner on stage. I want to see Eisenstein, or people like Fritz Lang, these people that I want to see another birth of a Bauhaus, really, where it was take a cold shower at 5 o'clock in the morning, no matter if the weather is 35 degrees below zero. It's cold, and be sitting, waiting for your lecture. I think it's educational. You know, people know that life is not a comfortable thing, but that the education they're receiving is, they're so hungry for that kind of stuff. That's a gift. Education is a gift, needs to be cultivated. Culture is a gift. Culture needs to be cultivated. It's almost like an oxymoron, but we need, in this time, what you and I are doing right now, hopefully will be watched by people, and hopefully it might influence people in a beneficial way, inspire people, because inspiration is the only fuel we have. Gasoline doesn't fill us, but inspiration will. It keeps you awake at night, makes you produce stuff, makes you think. I look out of the window here in the middle of the night, and I look at the still water, you know, maybe a little boat passing by between Queens and Manhattan. And I don't know why it fills my heart with love. You know, I feel passion coming back because of one image, which in reality is not the reality, because the guy driving that boat in the middle of a freezing weather, in the middle of the East River with no lights on, may be nightmarish to him. To me, it produces love. And that is my mission in life, is to express that love.
Yeah, that's what a beautiful and great image. And I mean, we're coming closer to our end, and this should be the last sentence, but I still want to ask, are you preparing, are you directing next year in 2 years? What are you doing, a stage direction? That's work coming up scheduled. I know everybody has halted everything in theaters, but do you have things lined up?
I do. I have a new play called Gastrointestinal Prayer, meaning I have the coming back of a play that I did in 1996 called Nowhere Man, coming back, like Earth and Trance came back.
In São Paulo, in Brazil, or
no,
in
Denmark.
Or
in Denmark, yeah, and some in Brazil. And I want to open gastrointestinal prayer here in New York as well. So it's a Danish-American production. And I'm working with a transvestite, hopefully opening new doors also towards sexuality and stuff like that. And I want to give people the idea that Vivaldi might have been a woman. So it's actually called Vivaldi. Basically, that's what it is.
Fantastic. So
four new things on the horizon.
Things. Yeah. Next to your writing, you mentioned. So things are hopeful, and I think what you said, that ambiguity, that you can have the weaknesses and the strengths, the horror of life, but also the beauty, like the paintings of a Bosch, you know, where you have hell, you have the paradise, and the middle is the earth, you know, reflects in a way. And we have really experienced this year, and I hope that we do learn the lessons, and also, you know, take to heart what you said. It's so true and it's real. And if there's anything what we share, artists with the scientists and everybody, we should search for truth. And as they say, you can never hide the sun or the moon, and not the truth. And it's for us also to reveal, at least for that moment, as you said, when we hold life for a second. Yeah.
You mentioned a wonderful analogy, because Hieronymus Bosch and Dante, people have to remember that the Inferno is called the Divine Comedy. So that is the thing. And Bosch is probably the most divine thing there is.
Yeah, and we went through that. So listen, thank you for taking the time. I know we could talk so much more. We could have shown so much from your work that looks like early Castor, you know, and where he got inspired from. We could have seen the great Philip Glass interview about you. So, but everybody can go to your website at Gerald Thomas and find out. And tomorrow we will hear from India and the Netherlands. We will hear from Abhishek Tapar, who is creating a kind of a lecture performance and trying to wrestle with what's real, what's not, what is a promotional business talk, and what is the spiritual heritage of his country, and how to combine these worlds. And Friday we have the great Sybil Kempson, the New York director and also leader of her 7 Daughters of Eve, and he's now upstate New York where she works, and she did these great ceremonies, you know, at the MoMA. And so let's hear what Sybil is up to. But it was a great start of the week. Really, thank you. Thanks again, Raphael, for connecting us. I hope, Gerald, it was as inspiring for you as it was for us listeners. Really, thank you. It's a respect for your work. And
I'll be calling you on your number.
Okay, and really, and thank you for sharing. To our listeners, thank you for taking time out. We are slowly coming to an end. Maybe the Segal Talk might come to an end, the end of June, and in the current form. And we will rethink, maybe engage in the parks and engage the idea of a festival here in New York. But it's been quite a journey. So really, thank you all for listening, because it is important for you what Gerald has to say, but also for Gerald to know that there's interest, there are listeners out there, as it is, you know, for Abhishek Tapar from India, who lives in the Netherlands. So thanks to HowlRound again, and all of you stay safe, and I hope you will tune in again, and all my best. And again, Gerald, I hope you'll see lots of great things looking out of your window. Bye-bye.
I will,
like the artists in their studios, and that's what they often painted and photographed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.